They never wrote her name on the mission board. Not on the maps taped to the command truck. Not in the radio logs that crackled with urgency and fear. Not even in the quiet after-action reports that would later be sealed and stored away. She was listed as driver. Nothing more. No rank spoken aloud. No praise expected. No story meant to survive the dust. Her name was Elena Ward, and on that morning, before the sun burned the desert gold, she believed she was just doing another transport run. She had been doing this for months, long, silent routes carved through hostile land, steering armored vehicles through places where the road was more suggestion than certainty. She knew the weight of the truck by heart, knew how it responded to sudden turns, knew the sound the engine made when something was wrong long before any warning light flickered. Driving was invisible work. If you did it right, no one noticed. If you failed, everyone paid. The convoy was scheduled to move before dawn. 4 armored trucks, 1 medical transport, 2 escort vehicles, a battalion of soldiers spread across forward positions, waiting on resupply and rotation orders. Elena climbed into her seat while the air was still cool, the desert holding its breath before the heat came. She adjusted her gloves, ran a hand across the cracked dashboard, and checked her mirrors like she always did, twice. She didn't pray, not because she didn't believe in anything, but because experience had taught her something better than prayer: attention saves lives. The radio crackled. Convoy lead, sound off. One by one, voices responded. Then, Driver 3, you good? Elena pressed the button. Driver 3 ready. That was all she said. No one asked anything else. The route had been cleared, or so they believed. Intelligence said the main road was safe, with alternate desert paths marked only for emergencies. Elena had studied those paths anyway, memorizing bends and dry riverbeds, places where sand swallowed tires and places where it hardened like stone. She had learned early that maps lie. The convoy rolled out as the sky lightened, engines rumbling like distant thunder. Dust rose behind them, soft at first, then thick enough to blur the horizon. For the first hour, everything was routine. Too routine. Elena felt it before she saw it, the subtle change in the road's texture through the steering wheel, a vibration that didn't belong. She eased her speed just a fraction, scanning ahead. That's when she noticed the birds. There were none. No scavengers. No movement in the sky. The desert, which was never truly empty, had gone silent. Her chest tightened. Convoy lead, she said calmly into the radio, request permission to slow. Something feels off. A pause. Negative. Driver 3, maintain speed. We're behind schedule. Elena's jaw clenched, but she complied, at least on the surface. She maintained the average speed, but her foot hovered, ready. Then it happened. The explosion didn't hit her truck. It hit the lead vehicle. The blast ripped through the morning like a scream, lifting steel and sand into the air. The shockwave slammed into Elena's chest, rattling her teeth. Smoke swallowed the road. Radios erupted with overlapping voices: panic, orders, static. Contact front, vehicle 1 disabled, medics up. Elena braked hard but controlled, bringing her truck to a halt without skidding. Her hands moved without conscious thought, switching frequencies, scanning mirrors, calculating distance. This wasn't random. This was an ambush. Gunfire cracked from the ridgelines. The sound was sharp, close. Too close. She saw soldiers spilling from vehicles, returning fire, dragging wounded to cover that barely existed. The road they'd trusted had become a trap. Elena waited for orders. They didn't come. The radio dissolved into chaos, commands shouted over one another, frequencies jammed, leadership cut off by smoke and noise. She looked ahead and saw something that made her stomach drop. The second truck, her truck, was now the pivot point. If they stayed, they would be pinned. If they tried to reverse blindly, they'd bunch up and die one by one. In the alternate routes, they were behind her, unknown, unapproved, unused. Elena swallowed. She had driven those routes in simulations. She had memorized them in the quiet hours when others slept. No one had told her to take command. No one had told her she could. But she understood something the maps and plans never did. The road ahead was already lost. She keyed the radio. Convoy lead, this is Driver 3. Main route compromised. I can take us south through Dry Channel Echo. It's narrow, but passable. Silence. Then a strained voice. That route isn't cleared. I know, she said. But it's not mined. And it's not under fire. How do you know? Because if I were them, she said quietly, eyes scanning the ridgeline, I'd expect us to stay right where we are. Another explosion hit closer this time. A scream cut off mid-syllable over the radio. The pause that followed felt endless. Then, Driver 3, do it. Elena didn't hesitate. She shifted gears, turned the wheel sharply, and took the truck off the road, down into a dry riverbed that looked like nothing but sand and shadow. The suspension screamed in protest. The vehicle tilted, threatening to roll. She corrected, heart pounding but steady. Follow me, she shouted into the radio. Single file, keep distance, trust the line. One by one, the vehicles followed. Bullets tore through the dust where they'd been seconds earlier. The riverbed twisted like a scar through the desert, narrow and unforgiving. Walls rose on either side, too steep for vehicles to climb, too tight for mistakes. Elena drove by instinct and memory, adjusting speed constantly, reading the ground the way sailors read waves. Behind her, an entire battalion moved, not on a map, not on a plan, but on her judgment. A damaged truck lagged, engine sputtering. Driver 3, came the call, we're losing power. Elena slowed just enough to let them close distance. Kill the engine for 5 seconds. Restart on my mark. Now, she counted in her head. 3, 2, 1, now. The engine roared back to life. They kept moving. The gunfire faded. The explosions stopped. The desert closed around them, swallowing sound and smoke alike. After nearly 40 minutes of driving through terrain no one had expected to use, the riverbed widened. The walls dropped away. Open desert stretched ahead, quiet, empty, safe. Elena finally allowed herself to breathe. The radio crackled again, different now. Clearer, softer. All units were clear. Someone laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. Someone else cried. Later, much later, when the convoy reached the safe zone and medics worked through the wounded and commanders tried to understand what had happened, Elena sat alone on the step of her truck, hands shaking now that the danger had passed. A lieutenant approached her, helmet under his arm, eyes wide with something like awe. You saved us, he said simply. Elena looked up at him, dust-streaked, exhausted. I just drove, she replied. But even as she said it, she knew the truth. She had done more than follow a road. She had chosen one, and that choice had carried an entire battalion out of death. By the time the sun reached its highest point, the desert looked harmless again. Clean sky, still air, no sign of the violence it had swallowed only hours earlier. That was the cruelest part of war, Elena thought as she leaned against the armored truck and watched medics work, the way the land erased suffering so quickly, as if nothing had ever happened. Inside the temporary safe zone, soldiers sat on the ground with their backs against tires and crates. Some stared into nothing, some joked too loudly, some were silent in ways that meant they would not sleep for a long time. Elena stayed where she was. Drivers weren't usually called into briefings. They weren't asked for reports beyond mileage, fuel usage, and mechanical issues. She expected to be ignored again once the adrenaline faded. But that didn't happen. A senior officer approached her just after noon. His uniform was dust-stained, his eyes bloodshot from stress and lack of sleep. He stopped in front of her truck and looked at the deep scratches along its side, the sand packed into the wheel wells. You drove this route before? He asked. Elena nodded. Simulations. Recon runs. Not officially cleared. He exhaled slowly. You understand you disobeyed protocol. Yes, sir. And if you had been wrong. I know. He studied her for a long moment, then shook his head slightly, almost to himself. If you hadn't done it, he said, we'd be counting bodies right now. Word spread fast after that. Not officially, not in announcements or commendations. But soldiers talked. They always did. By evening, people she had never met nodded at her when she passed. A medic pressed a bottle of water into her hand without saying anything. Someone clapped her on the shoulder and said, hell of a drive. She didn't know how to respond. That night, she lay on her cot staring at the canvas ceiling, replaying every second of the escape. Every turn, every decision, every moment where it could have gone wrong. Sleep never came. 2 days later, the battalion commander requested her presence. Elena stood at attention inside a makeshift command tent, dust still clinging to her boots. The commander, a woman with a sharp gaze and a reputation for absolute fairness, gestured for her to sit. I've reviewed the incident, the commander said. Every report, every radio transmission we recovered. Elena waited. You were not the highest-ranking person on that route. No, ma'am, you were not ordered to reroute the convoy. No, ma'am, the commander leaned forward. And yet you did. Yes, ma'am. Why? Elena hesitated, then answered honestly. Because staying meant we would die. The commander nodded once. Do you know how many soldiers you moved through that channel? Elena swallowed. No, ma'am, 812. The number landed like a weight. 812 lives, each with families, histories, futures, that had passed through a narrow desert scar because she trusted her judgment. You didn't just save time, the commander continued. You saved the battalion's operational strength. You preserved our ability to fight another day. Elena looked down at her hands. They were steady now. There will be an official recommendation, the commander said. But understand this, history may not remember your name. Elena met her eyes. I'm okay with that. The commander studied her, then smiled faintly. I figured you would be. Weeks passed. The battalion moved. Missions continued. New dangers replaced old ones. Elena went back to driving, back to early mornings and long routes, back to being invisible. But something had changed. Officers listened when she spoke now. Soldiers trusted her instincts without question. When routes were discussed, someone always asked, "What does the driver think?" She never abused it. She knew leadership wasn't about being loud, it was about being right when it mattered. Months later, the incident appeared in a sanitized report. No names, no drama, just a line about adaptive routing under fire. Elena clipped it out and folded it into her pocket. That was enough. Her tour ended quietly. No parade, no ceremony. She flew home on a transport plane filled with strangers who shared a look that only those who had been there understood. When she stepped onto civilian ground, the noise felt wrong, too loud, too careless. She took a driving job back home. Long-haul transport, familiar roads, different dangers. Sometimes, late at night, she found herself gripping the wheel a little tighter when the road narrowed, when shadows stretched too long. She never told her coworkers what she'd done. Years passed. One evening, a knock came at her door. A young man stood there, nervous, holding a small box. He wore a uniform she hadn't seen in a long time. "Are you Elena Ward?" he asked. She nodded. "I don't know if you remember me," he said quickly. "I was a private. Third vehicle. Engine failure." She did remember. "I just wanted to say, my daughter was born last week," he continued, voice shaking. "And I know I wouldn't be here if you hadn't taken that route." Elena felt her throat tighten. He handed her the box. Inside was a simple patch, worn, faded, stitched with the battalion's insignia. "We never forgot," he said. After he left, Elena sat alone for a long time, the patch resting in her hands. She thought about the maps that lie, the plans that fail, the quiet roles that change everything. She had never been meant to be a hero. She had just been a driver who refused to follow a road into death. And somewhere, 812 lives had continued because of it. That was her legacy.